right? That's the cure-all, you know? If we just get a young pastor in there, well, what happens is that, you know, you sign up, right, like Kyle, and I'm encouraged because, you know, he's almost like Moses now, getting that white thing going on, you know, that comes with doing hard things, right? And what gives us gray hair? We get mad, right? We get frustrated, we get disappointed, we have emotions. That's where gray hair comes from. Because all that stuff gives us emotion, and once we've had more than enough emotion, it starts to fall out, okay? And eventually it all goes away, but we're going to talk today about emotions, okay? Because is there anybody here who hasn't looked at Facebook or something like that and got mad? If you raised your hand and say you hadn't got mad looking at Facebook, I know you're crazy, okay? Anybody looked at it and been discouraged, right? We all have. And so emotion's a normal thing that we go through in life, whether we're getting mad, whether we're getting, you know, man, how much longer can this stuff go on, right? Whatever it is, okay, we all have it. And so we're going to look back at some biblical examples. I'm not going to necessarily read the scriptures because they're long to explain these stories, but I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. And so Moses gave water twice to the Israelite people. The very first time, he was exasperated. God's mad because these people are down there making idols and everything, and God's like, go down there and I'm gonna smite him. And Moses is like, nope. He pleads on their behalf. He tries to defend him. He's not mad at him yet, okay? And so he goes up there. God's like, okay, Moses, I'm gonna let you get down there and you give them my law, and we'll see how they respond. And Moses gets down there. What happens when he gets down at the bottom of the mountain? He throws them. He's mad. He gets as mad because he didn't see what God saw yet. When he sees it, he's as mad as God was. And he throws him down. Now, were there any penalties for Moses for getting mad right there? Did God get upset with him? He goes on to lead them, right? They get banished for 40 years or so. They got to come back. But Moses is still good in God's eyes. Moses still is called by God. So later on, you fast forward a few years, like 30, 40 years or so, and Moses is, well, guess what? He's mad. People are complaining because these same people, okay, who have been given everything they need, now all of a sudden, we're thirsty. We want some water. And Moses is like, he goes to God frustrated, and he says, God, these people, they want water. Moses is like, go over there, or God's like, go over there, touch the rock, and say to it, give me some water, okay? Don't do nothing else but that. Just go over there and do that. So what does Moses do? He gets mad again. He hits the rock, and he screams at him, yells at him, you rebel people, what do you think you're doing? All right, here you go. Boom, you get your water. That cost Moses the promised land. Same thing, anger. One time God doesn't, the righteous anger of throwing the tablets was the same anger that God had felt in that moment the first time. Moses was in alignment with God in that moment. When he comes down and hits the rock and yells at folks, that's pure Moses. God's got nothing to do with that. And he was disobedient to God. He didn't do exactly what God said to do.
But he is half Egyptian.
He is half Egyptian. And one of the things that happens with this, though, is that Moses had a natural reaction here. If you tell me you haven't been mad, you're crazy. Okay, we've all been mad at some point or time or another, just like Moses gets mad. The challenge for us is making sure that our anger is in alignment with what God's plan is. Okay, and so we've always got to be listening and attentive to exactly what God's telling us to do, and that we don't add anything to it or take away from it. When we start to do that, that emotion gets the best of us. So there's another great story in the Bible about a guy named Elijah, right? Elijah's having this battle, right, with Bathsheba. Excuse me, not Bathsheba, Jezebel, right? Arguing with her, destroying the priest. Now Elijah goes head to head with her priests, and they are destroyed by God. And then Elijah's doing awesome things for God. And then Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you. This dude has just done amazing things. And what does he do? He gets afraid and he gets discouraged. and he runs. He runs away. And then he says, God, take my life from me. I'm done. I can't do anymore. Okay? Just gives up, ready to give up. What does God do? Shut up and go to sleep. Okay? Tells him, rest. And so he rests. When he wakes up, what does God do? He doesn't say, oh, Elijah, I understand. No, he says, eat. So he makes him rest, makes him eat. And then when he's done with that, he gets back up, he makes him eat again, makes him rest again. And then when Elijah wakes up, he says, go walk 40 days. Okay. God doesn't sound like a very good parent, does he? You know, we're supposed to be, we're supposed to be friends with our kids. Well, he doesn't give in to him. And so God says, okay, come over, walk over here, and I'm going to tell you something. And then he gets up to the mountain, and there's all kinds of noise and stuff going on, wind, rain, all this stuff, you know, that you would typically attribute with God, right? A big noisy God. And Elijah doesn't hear God in that. And then once all that's done, the still soft voice of God talks to Elijah. Now, once again, he doesn't say, I feel sorry for you, whatever. He asks him, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Elijah's like, and he wants to complain and whine some more, you know. Well, God, I've been doing all these things for you, and I'm just tired. God lets that sit for a minute, and he says, why are you here? Gives him the exact same answer again. Gives the exact same answer to God. And God says, okay, go back down the mountain and pick your replacement, okay, which is going to be Elisha. Go down and make this happen. And he gives him more work to do. He doesn't say take a break, doesn't say take a sabbatical, doesn't say, you know, spend 6 months off. He says go back to work, okay? Now, why would God not have any compassion on Elijah when Elijah's exhausted? Because Elijah's exasperation and his fear was not in alignment with God's plan, because he had done amazing things. He had all the proof he needed to know that he was a man of God doing the things that God had called him to do, and yet his human emotion got the best of him, and God just put him back to work. Now, these are two examples of biblical men who had emotions, both good and bad, right? So if we start to set too high an expectation of ourselves that we should not be emotional, that we should be calm in all things, okay, we're kidding ourselves to think that we can have that much control over our emotions. Now, I'll give you a quick story here about how emotion works from a science standpoint, right? Is that when we see an event that reminds us of something, we go back to that earlier event, we respond the exact same way every time. No matter how long we live, we're always going to do that. And so for me, I learned something new about 6 months ago about something that happened to me back in 1994 that made me better understand it. So of the five senses, hearing, sight, sound, all those things, right? Smell is the only one that doesn't go through your left brain. You don't have to think about it. It immediately goes to your emotion. You smell something, you immediately go to emotion. You get a piece of clothing from somebody that you loved, you know, a year later that they passed on, and you pull it out of the closet, you feel it, right? So 1994, my daughter's getting ready to get born, 27 hours worth of labor, and it just ain't happening. And so they decided to do a C-section. So I'm in there. I'm excited. Now at this time, I don't know if it's going to be a boy or girl, because back I just wasn't going to figure that out. So I'm sitting there waiting. They do the first cut. They're getting in there to get after everything, and I don't even pay any attention. And they take this cauterizing gun, which is a heat gun that seals up the veins, capillaries and stuff, right? So they take that across there, and smoke comes up. I'm still not thinking about it. That smoke, burning flesh, hits my nose, and instantly I'm back 3 years earlier, sitting on an airfield in Kuwait during Desert Storm, and that's where my head's at. It's just the smell of burning flesh. I'm in this precious moment of my kid being born, and within seconds, I'm back in combat, and that's where my head's at. I'm afraid. I'm what's going on, and it stole that moment from me, and I had no control over it. So when we think we can have total control over our emotions, even in the most precious moments, you're kidding yourself. And so in that moment, I was a wreck for about 15 seconds. And then Courtney comes out, and I see her going over, and it's instantly Daddy's little girl. Okay, and I was right back in that room then. I wasn't on the airfield. God brought me right back there to that in that moment, and it was good from there. But I realized how quickly we can sit here and our brains can trick us into responding in an unbiblical way to the things that are going on around us. So if we've got no control over this, then what are we supposed to do as Christian men to get control of it? The first thing is to admit we have no control over it and give it to Him and ask Him to at least give us a pause when we start getting frustrated, when we start getting discouraged. Ask Him to slow us down a little bit to where we can think about it and say, you know what? No, God's got this. He's got this in the long run. I don't need to do whatever I think I need to do. And I've done a lot of dumb things in my life, guys, out of anger, out of frustration. Maybe we get that pause where we decide not to do that. And it's a decision. It truly is a decision as to when we choose to not go the full breadth of an emotion. We can feel it, we can't control feeling it come on, but once we feel it and we recognize it for what it is, we get a choice to make. And so I'm going to talk about another biblical figure. Let me say something real quick first. What about Moses and Elijah are special? What about these emotional guys that are special? Who did Jesus see when He came up out of being baptized? You mean an angry guy and a discouraged guy still get there to a high place? Okay, right? There's hope, guys. Even when we make mistakes, we can still be in that place that's special, okay? That's not what keeps us from getting there, okay? What keeps us from getting there is having a relationship with God where we keep ourselves from going too far. So how do we do that? We're going to jump to another guy, an emotional guy. Does anybody consider David an emotional guy? Yeah. But David was perfect, right? He never made a mistake? Okay. So David was a guy that he couldn't rely on justification by the law, okay? Because heck, he broke one of the commandments, didn't he? 2 of them, matter of fact, right? So he can't get there by the law. He can't get there by in any way other than relying on God's mercy and grace. That's where he's going to appeal to and to be able to respond to that. That's his mechanism to get there. So when we think about, I love Psalm 13 because it's one of the shorter ones. I like short ones because I got ADHD, so I can get bored pretty quick with one. So Psalm 13 is only 6 verses long, okay? And so we're going to start out with verses 1 through 4, and it says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." That's the first 4 verses. Whole lot of complaining going on. And it reminds me of taking a trip with kids. If you haven't experienced this yet, you're gonna, okay? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? If you're going to Florida, okay, the best thing to do is just tell the kids you're getting in the car and going somewhere. We're going to stop off at a McDonald's, we're going to stop off at a Burger King, and then we're going to stop off at a Cracker Barrel. Okay, just tell them that. Don't tell them where you're going, because otherwise it will be in their head. It's this unending journey of never getting there. Guys, that's exactly what David's feeling here. David's in a moment of suffering, feeling like he's distant. He feels, his emotion is he feels like he's distant from God. He feels like God is ignoring him. He feels like God is doing all, I keep saying, he feels. Just like those kids in the car, they feel like this trip's never going to end. Can't we just instantly be at Disney? Okay. David wants to instantly be next to God, but he's just like a kid. How long? How long? How long? So David has spent these first four verses just lamenting, complaining, and basically lying to God. God, how long will you stay away from me? God never left him in the first place. Okay? So he's made this up that God has distanced him. He's made it up in his head that God is ignoring him. This is all in David's imagination. Okay? And David has got himself wound up over it. And so then the psalm turns, and in verse 5 it says, then he says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. And then I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Whew. The guy goes from complaining to hope, and all it is a change in the way he feels in that moment, because it's poor me, great God. Poor me, great God. And so, guys, when we get wrapped up in our emotional moments, the exit door, the emergency fire exit, whatever you want to call it, is that phrase, poor me, okay, got that done, great God. And when we start thinking about great God, we start to realize that, oh my goodness, you know, one of the things that gets me frustrated, I call it righteous frustration, okay, is when we in America complain about anything, okay, all right. Oh my goodness, I went to Cracker Barrel and the service was terrible. So what? There's people starving all over the planet, man. Are you kidding me? All right. Are we really complaining about this? And so we have to be cautious, okay, about perspective in this. The more time we spend in the poor me or anger that's generated by poor me, and we need to jump right into great God. So when you're having moments of emotion and you first realize that you've been triggered for whatever reason for feeling a certain way, just tell yourself, great God. And start thinking about that for a little bit. And then you'll start to realize he's given you the blessings of children. He's given you the blessings of life. He's giving you the blessings of opportunity to share his gospel message with others. And guys, very quickly we will be like David and start dancing again. Because David's another dude that he's not, you know, sure, he's remembered for being a fallen man and making mistakes like we all have, but he's also known for being a man after God's own heart. And so we can, if we remember to praise him and dance a little bit for him, it's all going to be fine. It is all going to be fine. People come to pastors all the time asking for counseling, and I get to hear all of the worst case scenarios that are going to happen. Okay? Now, there have been times I've really wanted to come back and say, I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to happen. I told you that wasn't going to happen. It's tempting, okay? But more often than not, as people start to get out of that emotion and start to read scripture and be reassured in it and hear what God's telling them in their life, they start to realize that those things aren't going to happen, that the worst isn't going to happen. Because what they're listening to in that moment of emotion, they're listening to what Satan wants them to do, which is to get them fearful, to get them discouraged, and to get them to give up. And if they can turn to God, great God, Satan's going to flee, and they'll be fine. Does that make sense? Any questions on this today?
Just come to the conclusion that God is why David is rejoicing in the end is because God is the giver of life.
That's right. Because God gives us everything.
My approach to Moses in this situation comes from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
My professional background is speech-language pathology, so I am obviously tuned in to what comes out of the mouth. What that says to me is that God offered Moses something that he has never offered to any other human being. when we stop and think that where we are was spoken into existence,
Mm-hmm.
what God was giving Moses was the opportunity for his ability to do something that God did.
Mm-hmm.
But Moses did not understand that because by his emotion,
Mm-hmm.
he was tuned in to the fact that I hit the rock before, all I have to do is hit the rock again. But he would have been able, by his own speech,
Mm-hmm.
to do something that God did. Moses, I doubt, never really put two and two together that way because what God's condemnation did came so quickly that it put him on the defensive, that
Mm-hmm.
he only knew what he had to do to take care of a physical need rather than a spiritual need.
That's right. We can confuse that in a heartbeat, the difference between our physical needs and what we really need spiritually.
The question then
Mm-hmm.
that asks is, why did God tell Moses to do that by speech? Because I think God had an ulterior motive of wanting to raise Moses to a higher level of commune with him,
Mm-hmm.
but he did not see that.
Yeah. That
Really,
I
it was an act of unbelief, you know. And I mean, kind of to Danny's point, when you're speaking to people, not even as a pastor, but when you're speaking to people, the hardest thing to convince them of is that God is in fact as good as He claims to be, and wants to give exactly what He says He wants to give. You know, it's what you said. You know, oh well, God, you know, He's gonna bait and switch me again, or you know, last time I tried this, it didn't work out so well. It's like it doesn't follow. You know, God really does want to bless people miraculously as He miraculously enables you to do that. You know, because the water wasn't for Moses; the water was for the congregation, for the people of
mm-hmm.
Israel. But God was going to empower Moses to do that.
And it's one of those. So I take it to this is that we can chase perfection all we want, but we're never going to get there. Uh, and you know, you think about Moses' journey, right? This is a dude that questioned a lot, and then he gets up there and gets told what he's going to do, and now he's got to go back to Egypt with the staff. And now he's going to do all these things, and he does exactly what God tells him to do. Put the staff down in the Nile, it turns to blood. Do this, do that, frogs, all these things. He does all that. If there was ever someone who firsthand, front row seat, box seat tickets to see the show of what God can do, it was Moses. It was Elijah. You know, these are guys talked about in Hebrews as heroes of the faith. You know, I call them heroes of the faith. And yet they had a moment where they faltered, or you know, I don't know if falter is a good word, or took something into their own hands, or whatever it was going on in their head at the time. But they again had an opportunity to glorify God by simply speaking into it in that moment and giving God all the glory because Moses got nothing. Okay, and he didn't get it right. Didn't do exactly what God asked him to do. And so I think that is like a cautionary tale for us is when we start feeling like we're better than or too good in our faith. You know, don't get me wrong, we should have confidence in our faith and confidence in our biblical knowledge and all those things as men because people look to us for response to those kind of things. But we need to be cautious that we continue to do what God wants us to do and not necessarily what we want to do, because that we start getting on real thin ice when we do those things. So, good stuff.